What's up, Mr. Stark?
Mr. Stark.
Mr. Stark, it smells like a new car in here.
Hey, Mr. Stark, what should I do? Gotta impress Mr. Stark, so...
I mean, what if Mr. Stark needs me or something, or... Mr. Stark? I don't feel so good.
It's 3:35 a.m. I just watched Spider-Man Far From Home, and I feel sick? Is that dramatic? Yeah. Is it weird that a comic book movie made me feel kind of sick? Yeah, very. But hear me out for a second before you smash that dislike button and tell me to get some help. Imagine living, breathing, and eating two things. And then imagine seeing something that makes you not like those two things. Makes you not want to care about those two things. Obviously, I fucking love Spider-Man and I fucking love movies. I've made, it has to be 1,000 at this point, Spider-Man videos. Negative Spider-Man videos, positive Spider-Man videos. I've given more than my 2 cents on Spidey. My plan was and still is to finish the Raimi series and cover this film and be done talking about the webhead. I've said almost everything I have to say, and to be honest, I'm getting tired of it all. All the hate, all the arguing about a fictional character that's supposed to bring people together. I don't need to give you the whole speech. You know this is an opinion piece. I encourage you to go see the movie and make your own opinion piece. You could love something that I hate. I could love something that you hate. You know the drill. Art is subjective. All I can do is tell you how I feel. And this is how I feel. Spider-Man Far From Home takes everything that worked about Endgame, every heartbreaking moment, and turns it into a joke within the first 2 minutes of the film. I looked over to my friend while I Will Always Love You was playing over goofy headshots of the dead Avengers, the dead heroes, while they were making a meme of the dead heroes, and his jaw had dropped to the floor. Right off the bat, how am I supposed to be invested in this Peter Parker's grief if the film is so focused on making fun of that grief? I guess I should have expected this. The same duo who wrote Ant-Man the Wasp, another fun, lighthearted adventure, wrote Far From Home, and maybe that's my problem with it. Far From Home is so focused on being fun, on being light, that it never explores its ideas or themes with any kind of weight. Once again, the lasting consequences for this version of Peter Parker are almost non-existent. Remember all the dramatic potential of May knowing Peter is Spider-Man?
What the f?
Watts and company could really dive deep into what it's like to be the mother of Spider-Man. Does she worry about him putting his life in danger every night? Does she worry the same thing that happened to the love of her life will happen to Peter? No. She's 100% supportive of her superhero son.
You know what she's like. If she finds out people try and kill me every single night, she's not gonna let me do this anymore.
Remember when half the universe got wiped out? Watts and company could really dive deep into the post-Endgame world and how Peter fits into that world. Did any of the people close to Peter survive the snap? Did any of the people close to Peter have to deal with the grief of the snap, the grief of losing Peter? Nope. Every key player from Homecoming conveniently got snapped and didn't suffer at all. Oh hey, remember when Tony Stark, who is just Uncle Ben in these movies? About that. Peter Parker is a good kid with a good heart. He was raised by the 2 best people in the world. One of those people was named Ben. Ben taught Peter how to be a good kid with a good heart. Ben died because of Peter's lack of responsibility. Spider-Man was born. Do we need to see Ben die again? Hell no. Is it unrealistic for Peter to never directly mention the man who taught him to be a hero? The man who raised him? The man who was his father? Hell yes. The problem isn't Tony Stark being a mentor. The problem isn't Tony Stark. The problem is the implication that Tony means more to Peter Parker than Ben ever did. Uncle Ben's suitcase is in this film and serves as the only reminder that Ben existed, and it ends up getting destroyed at some point off screen. And Peter doesn't give a single shit. Peter Parker doesn't give a single shit about losing something of his uncle's. Which makes me assume that Ben was someone in this universe who didn't really matter all that much to Peter. Great. Cool. That makes perfect sense. Anyways, where was I? Oh, hey, remember when Tony Stark, who is just Uncle Ben in these movies, died right in front of Peter, died in the arms of Pepper, Rhodey, and Peter? How does that affect Peter? He's grieving, but he wants to fall in love and go on vacation? Those things don't mix. They don't. I'm sorry, but it's not real to me. It doesn't work for me. I can't feel for Peter's loss if the movie doesn't really feel for Peter's loss. Any and all dramatic potential is thrown out the window for the sake of another fun Spider-Man adventure featuring a quirky cast of underdeveloped kids and a villain whose motivation is based entirely around Tony Stark. But this time, it's in Europe. Yay! Honestly guys, the entire time I was watching I felt like this film was fighting with itself about what it wanted to be. Does it want to be a teen summer vacation flick with Spider-Man? Does it want to be a story about Peter dealing with the death of a mentor? Does it want to be a classic Spider-Man story about Peter wanting to just be Peter Parker, but having the responsibility of being Spider-Man? It wants to be so many things that it never has time to develop any of those stories and ideas. Forget the fact that this is a bad Spider-Man movie. God, I can't believe I started that meme. I went in fully expecting it to be a different take on the character that I'm obviously not a fan of thus far. I figured this would be a sequel to Homecoming and a sequel to this particular vision of Spidey. But what I didn't expect, what caught me completely off guard, was how completely inconsistent with that vision Far From Home was. Peter Parker in this film trusts Mysterio with Tony's final gift to him after having 2 conversations with Beck. He not only gives Mysterio something that should mean the world to him, he gives Mysterio the glasses that have the power to literally control the world after knowing him for less than 2 days and 20 minutes of screen time. Peter Parker in this film all of a sudden has a crush on MJ after paying no attention to her in Homecoming. I guess he came back from the dead, witnessed the death of his idol, and now he wants to get romantic with a girl he barely knows and go on a vacation. This is Mary Jane we are talking about, or Michelle Jones. Either way, she is the love of Peter Parker's life, and I will never forgive this film for not caring enough to develop it. Sure, it's cute, it's awkward. Zendaya and Tom Holland have some very nice chemistry, but that's all there is to it. It seems like a high school crush that came out of nowhere. In Homecoming, MJ obviously teased Peter because she liked him. They could have turned that teasing and frenemy relationship into a real friendship. They could have taken their time over the course of a couple films and got me to want them to end up together. But Far From Home doesn't have the time for that. Instead, we start the film and Peter has this big plan to win MJ over. They introduce this character named, I don't know what his name was, and have this very unnecessary love triangle that has the emotional depth of an episode of Hannah Montana.
Who would have thought that a girl like me would double as a superstar?
Peter Parker in this film is told to step up and be the next Iron Man, and then he's told that he just needs to be the next Spider-Man. He just needs to be himself, which is pretty much what he learned in Homecoming, but then they blast AC/DC as Peter is making his new high-tech suit looking just like Tony Stark did. If his arc is supposed to be your own man, then stick with that. Don't tell us one thing and show us another. I can't be invested in something that the writers don't seem sure of. The truth is, I can't be invested in any of this. I had hopes for Mysterio, I love myself some Jake, but Mysterio's motivation, like Vulture's, has nothing to do with Peter. There are no personal stakes. They try to make me care about his relationship to Peter, but spend no time developing it. Holland and Gyllenhaal have some really nice chemistry, but that can only get you so far. Quentin Beck's motivation is all about Tony, and that's just, dare I say it, lazy? Gyllenhaal does the best and has a lot of fun with what he's given, but he's given so little. It's not like it's a surprise that he's the bad guy. Everybody who has picked up a Spider-Man comic or seen a Spider-Man flick knows that he's going to go bad at some point. So if I'm not connected to him, if I can't see his point and I can't feel his connection to Peter, then why am I supposed to care? Because he got fucked over by Tony Stark? That would maybe work if either of the films critiqued Tony Stark's actions, but they don't. With Vulture, you could at least empathize a tad, but with Mysterio, he's nothing more to me than a by-the-book villain. There is one standout visual sequence where Peter gets knocked around in a Mysterio acid trip, but it's seemingly all done in a computer. No practical effects. Nothing tangible for me to grab onto. This is more of a personal issue I have with a lot of MCU films, especially in recent years. They make these things so quickly that a lot of the time practical stunt work and choreographed fight scenes are instead replaced with action pieces all done in post. And yeah, these visual effects are really creative and the sequences are cool, but call me an old man, I just prefer the real deal. Outside of that one sequence though, this movie has no overt visual style or flair, which shocked the hell out of me because the same person who shot Far From Home shot some very beautiful and artful episodes of Daredevil. Far From Home brings back a final swing of sorts, but it's nothing that we haven't seen done with more gravitas and more elegance in previous Spider-Man films. In the Raimi films, in Spider-Verse, even in the first Amazing Spider-Man film, the final swing was a triumphant, heroic, and sometimes haunting note to end the films on. It was a celebration of Peter's growth and of Miles' growth. This Peter doesn't grow, he doesn't really change, so his final swing feels so soulless to me. I hate being mean, I really do, but I wish John Watts would aim higher. By the end of the film, like Homecoming, I was so sick of medium shot, reverse shot. I was so sick of cutaway jokes. I was sick of Spider-Man's beautiful suit being painted over in post with CG. Look at this thing. Why would you want to touch that? It's perfect. I was sick of Tom Holland pouring his heart and soul into a film and into a role where the writing made it impossible for me to connect to Spider-Man, to Peter. I was sick of it all. Teenagers don't behave this way. They don't have the emotional maturity and empathy of 12-year-olds. I'm freaking 20. Not too long ago, I was the age of these kids, and none of this feels real to me. It feels like a 30-year-old's understanding of what it's like to be 16, 17. It's an idealized version of being a teenager. Ned starts dating, I guess this girl is Betty Brant. We really know nothing about her going in and know nothing about her going out. And the entire thing is this obnoxious running gag. I think it speaks volumes about where they want to take the character of Spider-Man in this universe when instead of fleshing out characters like Ned, Betty, Flash, key players in the Spider-Man canon, they are used for the sole purpose of getting a chuckle out of the audience. How can Peter Parker afford to go on this trip? I don't know. Maybe it's paid for by the school. Perfect opportunity to have Peter have some relatable money problems, but nope, it's too fun for that. I'm sick of a Peter Parker without problems, without relatable problems, and without lasting consequences for those unrelatable issues he faces. This isn't a version of Peter that I can empathize with, feel for, care about, root for. This is a kid who is handed everything and wants to give it all up to go on a school trip. This is a kid who gets knocked down but gets pulled back up by Tony Stark, by Nick Fury, by Happy Hogan, by his supportive friends. This is a kid who hasn't quite got it, and with great power comes great responsibility. This is a kid who has the name Spider-Man but feels nothing like Spider-Man to me. Peter Parker in the MCU is a happy-go-lucky kid who lives in the shadow of a more interesting, charismatic, and capable hero, and maybe that's the point. He was introduced as a fun side character in Civil War, and from there on out, used to tell us things about Tony Stark and his legacy. The story of Spider-Man shouldn't be a story about Iron Man. The legend of Peter Parker is more important than that. Far From Home doesn't take the iconic character of Spider-Man seriously, so why should I take this movie seriously? This film constantly feels the need to remind you not to take it seriously. Peter is betrayed, beat up, his friends almost die, and Mysterio is dead. But seconds after all this trauma, Peter is smiling because he kissed the girl and saved the day. Nothing is learned. No lasting impact. No emotional weight. J.K. Simmons returns as J. Jonah Jameson, which in any other franchise or any other movie would be literally the best thing ever, and I would probably cry tears of joy. But I could care less because seconds later, the entire world now knows that Peter Parker is Spider-Man. Any chance of his identity crisis becoming an issue, all the stories and all the drama that comes from him having to hide half of himself, is tossed away. If I were an optimistic man, I would say that they could tell some pretty dramatic and cool stories about the entire world knowing he's Spider-Man. It's a very different direction for this classic character, a direction that could be interesting and provide real lasting consequences. But knowing how the MCU has treated Peter, it will probably be brushed off and somehow turned into a running joke. Clearly, I'm not an optimistic man. Spider-Man Far From Home was a theater experience I genuinely wish to forget. I never thought Spider-Man would become this. I never thought I would see a Spider-Man movie that made me feel this empty. And I guess I'm just done. You won't see another video from me about this franchise unless they take another major shift in direction. You won't see the dude who has been in love with Spider-Man and been in love with film since he was 4 years old. You won't see my ass in the theater. And boy, does that suck. This isn't my Spider-Man, which would be fine if this was a film I enjoyed outside of that, but it wasn't. This isn't any kind of film series that I care about. If you care about it, that's great. If this Peter works for you, that's great. I don't want to take that away from you. I'm not here to shit on your joy and happiness, and I'm definitely not here to tell you how to feel. All I can do is tell you how I feel, and I feel a little bit heartbroken.